Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that's honestly a total game changer. We're unpacking Rolf Dobelli's amazing book, The Art of Thinking Clearly. Look, if you've ever wanted to just master your own mind, make sharper decisions in your business, your finances, your relationships, or honestly, just everyday life, you are in exactly the right place. We're going to uncover all those sneaky, hidden traps in our daily thinking. We'll break down these big cognitive concepts so you can walk away seeing reality a whole lot clearer. So here's the big question. Why do really smart people make really bad decisions? It's kind of a wild paradox, right? I mean, have you ever wondered why incredibly intelligent investors will buy right at the peak of some crazy market frenzy and then panic and sell at the absolute bottom? Or why perfectly capable people stay stuck in toxic relationships for literally years? Or why we'll just toss all our logic out the window to follow a crowd, even when that crowd is, well, obviously wrong? Well, the answer actually isn't a lack of intelligence at all. It's something way more universal, and it starts with how our brains actually process the world.
Section 1. The Myth of Rational Thinking.
Okay, let's dive into this. To figure out why smart folks make bad choices, we first have to shatter this huge illusion we all have. Most of us walk around totally convinced that we're these highly logical creatures, just coolly evaluating facts and making purely rational choices. But reality? Yeah, it doesn't work like that. We don't actually see the world exactly as it is. Instead, we're looking at everything through these invisible mental filters, which are called cognitive biases. Think of a cognitive bias literally like an optical illusion, but for your brain. See, your brain is just constantly taking these little mental shortcuts to save time and energy. It's a survival thing. But the problem is, these shortcuts often lead to terrible conclusions and massive blind spots. So understanding that your mind is hardwired to take these flawed shortcuts and that it's all about evolutionary biology, not your IQ, that is absolutely crucial. It's step 1 toward clearer thinking.
Section 2. Traps of Ego and Crowds.
Right, so now that we know our brains are actively taking these sneaky shortcuts, let's look at the specific traps that go right after our egos and our nature as social creatures. And man, one of the most dangerous biases out there is confirmation bias. It works like this. When we form an opinion, our brain naturally defaults to asking, why am I right? We actively hunt down any piece of information that backs up what we already believe, and we just entirely ignore the stuff that contradicts it. It's exactly like how a social media algorithm works, right? It only feeds you what you already agree with, creating this massive echo chamber. If you think a certain stock is a sure thing, you're going to magically only see the positive headlines about it. But if you want to be a clear thinker, you have to force your brain to snap out of that cycle. You actually have to go hunting for opposing viewpoints and ask yourself a really uncomfortable question. What if I'm completely wrong? And that natural tendency to just seek comfort in our own beliefs, it gets heavily amplified by the people around us. I mean, we've all heard the saying, just because everyone is doing something doesn't mean it's the right choice. Well, that right there is social proof in action. We are social creatures through and through. So when we see a huge group of people believing something, our brains automatically assume, hey, it must be true. Back in the day, that kept us alive. But today, it's the exact reason why dumb fads spread like wildfire, why massive economic bubbles inflate and burst, and why crowds so often make incredibly irrational decisions. Thinking independently is genuinely hard, mostly because it takes real courage to just stand there, completely alone, against the herd.
Section 3. Hidden Realities.
So, okay, we're blinded by our egos, we get swayed by the crowd. But our brains also do this weird thing where they selectively process history, basically hiding the full picture from us. And this brilliantly illustrates what I mean. Think about the tiny fraction of famous winners we are constantly bombarded with. The billionaire tech founders, the star athletes, the authors who write blockbusters. We see them everywhere. But then think about the thousands and thousands of invisible failures that we literally never hear about. That is survivorship bias. There's actually this super famous example from World War II. Engineers were trying to figure out where to add armor to their bomber planes. So they looked at the planes coming back and wanted to put armor right where all the bullet holes were. Makes sense, right? Well, actually, no. A mathematician named Abraham Wald pointed out a massive flaw in their logic. They were only looking at the planes that actually survived the trip. The armor needed to go where the missing planes got hit. The point is, we hyperfocus on the winners and completely ignore the failures. So whatever path you're evaluating in life, the single most critical question you can ask yourself is, what am I not seeing here? You really have to look for that massive invisible slice of reality.
Section 4. The Pain of Losing.
Now, seeing the full picture logically, that's one thing. But dealing with it emotionally is a whole different ballgame. Let's think about $100 for a second. As humans, we absolutely despise losing things way, way more than we enjoy winning them. The sheer psychological pain of losing $100 hits us significantly harder than the little burst of joy we get from finding $100. And again, evolutionarily, this makes total sense. Back in the Stone Age, scoring an extra meal was great, but losing your only meal meant you might literally starve. So we are hardwired to completely panic over losses. But in today's world, this loss aversion bias just makes us cling to terrible investments, dodge risks that we really should be taking, and basically make highly emotional, irrational choices. To actually win, you've got to train yourself to look past that short-term emotional sting.
And that ancient, primal fear of losing ties perfectly into something called the sunk cost fallacy. Tell me if this sounds familiar. Have you ever sat through a completely terrible, agonizing 2-hour movie just because you already dropped $15 on the ticket? Yep, that's the sunk cost fallacy right there. Or imagine you've spent years grinding on a business project, or you've poured a ton of your savings into a stock, and it is just obviously tanking. Most people will actually keep throwing money or time at it simply because they've already invested so much. But here's the harsh truth. Past investments of time and money cannot be recovered. Period. Done. We end up sabotaging our own futures by desperately clinging to bad projects just because our egos won't let us admit that we lost the initial investment.
Section 5. Tools for clearer thinking.
All right, we've spent a good chunk of time looking at all these cautionary tales, how our egos, the herd mentality, our blind spots, and our deep-seated emotions just totally lead us astray. Now it's time to flip the script and talk solutions. Our very first tool? Simplicity. We almost always assume that a super complex explanation or some massively convoluted business strategy is automatically smarter or better than a simple one. But reality honestly doesn't work that way. The absolute best decisions usually come from stripping away the noise and just focusing on a few really important factors, rather than getting totally bogged down in hundreds of trivial little details. Clear thinking is all about removing that unnecessary complexity. You have to identify the core variables and concentrate only on what truly, genuinely matters. Okay, here is another incredibly powerful mental tool for you. Always ask yourself, what is the exact mathematical likelihood of this outcome? Look, life is fundamentally uncertain. Almost nothing is completely guaranteed. But our human brains, they constantly crave absolute certainty. And when we don't get it, we end up dealing with all this anxiety and emotional distress. What Dobelli tells us to do is to replace that cozy illusion of certainty with the hard reality of probabilities. If you start actively thinking in probabilities, like literally stopping to calculate the actual mathematical chances of something happening, you immediately dial down your emotional reaction to all of life's chaos. It forces you to step back and make a much more rational choice. So let's pull all of this together into a real, usable toolkit. Step 1. Challenge your own beliefs. Actively go out and find information that proves you wrong, just to fight off that confirmation bias. Step 2. Ignore the crowd. Don't just blindly do what everyone else is doing. And always look for those invisible failures we talked about. Step 3. Focus on the long-term outcomes. Seriously, do not let the short-term sting of a loss or the trap of sunk costs dictate your next move. Cut your losses early. And finally, step 4. Think in probabilities, not certainties, and keep your variables as incredibly simple as possible. Making this checklist a habit, that is your secret weapon for making way fewer predictable errors day to day. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to take away this one core message. The ultimate goal here is not perfect thinking. It's simply avoiding predictable errors. The big takeaway from all of Dobelli's work isn't that you have to become some infinitely wise genius or that you're never going to make another mistake again. That's impossible. It's really just about recognizing these common, predictable mental traps so you can hit pause and act a little more rationally when it actually counts. Because at the end of the day, the quality of your life is basically determined by the quality of your decisions. Honestly, just dodging these mental pitfalls is sometimes all it takes to completely change the trajectory of your life for the better. Which brings us to one final, slightly provocative thought. Knowing about the sunk cost fallacy, ask yourself this. If you are starting out today, with all the knowledge you have right now, but absolutely zero past investment, would you still choose your current path? Whether we're talking about a work project, a stock portfolio, your career, or even a relationship, if your honest-to-goodness answer is no, well, it might just be time to move on. Think clearly, choose wisely, and maybe take a moment today to really evaluate your own choices. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep mastering that mind.